Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It is Business Monday. It is rainy and bleak. It is looking a little gloomy out there. I am Josh Fenton. This is the Money Man, Gary Sass. Gary, we've got some bleak weather. Some bleak news broke last week. Somebody I think we were both very fond of and had worked with, Ray Fogarty, former state representative, head of the Chafee Center at Bryant University, kind of the state's leader on trade issues, great researcher, innovator, really put that place on the map. Talk a little bit about your experience with Ray Fogarty, who passed away last week.
Yeah, it was a great loss to the state. I first met Ray when he was in the legislature, and we worked on a couple of issues, not always on the same side, but we worked closely on tax issues and issues of good government. And then when he went to Bryant, you're right, he really became Rhode Island's champion for national and international trade.
Yeah, really amazing job.
And everybody liked him. He wasn't a partisan bone in his body when it came to his job. He was supported by people at state government. He was supported by people in the business community. He was very highly regarded at Bryant University. It's really a great center that he ran, and he's the one that built it up. So he's going to be missed. But I found an attribute of his, in this day and age, really very refreshing. He was always positive. I remember once when I had put together an index and showed Rhode Island ranked near the bottom of this, that, and the other thing. And Ray said, "Now why don't you put together an index to show where we rank highly?" and he went ahead and did that. So an extremely positive guy who can be missed. You know, the good die young, and it's just sad.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I knew him from probably, I don't know, 1986, when I was just a young staffer working for John Chafee. We worked on an environmental issue. He was a Democratic legislator up at the State House. Couldn't have been more cooperative, couldn't have been more teamwork. Knew him over the last 30 years. Worked with him on federal grant back in my previous life for the cranes down at Proport, and his center did all the analysis and the study, and just really just a lovely person to work with, and is just going to be missed in Rhode Island as one of those people that brought people together to kind of fix things and move things forward. He really got Rhode Islanders thinking about international trade.
Yeah, he was.
No two ways about it.
We have too few people like that. He was a very positive force. He wasn't looking for credit for himself, but he was looking to get the job done, and he did get the job done.
Yeah. Let's jump to another issue. About 7 o'clock this morning, news broke that GE was flushing its one-year tenured CEO, Flannery, I think it is,
yep.
Who had been, I think, the poor victim of the mismanagement that had ravaged that company over the previous few years. GE was the worst performing stock, got bounced off the Dow Jones. I think the stock off of Friday was an $11 stock.
It was up today, though.
It's up 15%. Is it fixable? Is it just too big to fix? 320,000 employees around the world, a conglomerate of, it used to all make sense that it was all together. Now, when you see its underperformance, you go, what were they thinking? Solar here, turbines there, this thing over there, digital over here, and not a lot of symmetry, and a massive underfunded pension liability, which doesn't get half the press that it should.
Well, it was a conglomerate without a strategy. You had some really big personalities putting together, Walsh,
and then Jeff Immelt.
Jeff Immelt. And it was really based on an old design. So today they really had to write down about $23 billion with a B of GE Power, because power is a very volatile kind of industry. They had to finally recognize what the degree of their cash shortfalls are. They're going to have to rebase the company and figure out what their dividend policies are going forward. It's a massive change. Now, they brought in an all-star. This guy that's the new CEO,
Yeah.
Larry Culp. came from Danica, which is a big company. It's an $18 billion company by revenue, employs about 67,000 people worldwide. It's involved heavily in medical manufacturing, medical equipment, medical design, environmental equipment, environmental design. So he was a superstar, in General Electric, just came on board recently. Flannery was a superstar too. He ran the one division of GE that's still doing very well.
Right.
That's just GE Health. But I think a couple of things are going to happen, and I have no, way to predict this. Everything is on the table.
Yeah.
Everything is on the table, and so you're going to see a massive restructuring. If I was a betting person, I would bet that the only thing they're not really going to put on the table is GE Health. That's the future, growth industry. But everything else is on the table. And they're going to have to put things on the table and do things in an extraordinary way to save this company. And I think Colt knows it. I think the other good thing that happened today, and I don't wish ill on anybody, but Flannery's leadership never was persuaded the market that the company had more value.
No.
And Colt has a little different reputation. I think he has some stronger leadership, at least perception, that the street may see. So it really says American. Charlie Wilson, when he was Secretary of Defense back in the Eisenhower years, came from General Motors, and said the business of America. General Motors is the business of America. I'm paraphrasing it wrong, but that was the idea. Well, the General Motors and General Electrics are no longer the business of America. It's very different, and Culp has a tremendous opportunity. There are assets there. But there's going to have to be some pain, some shedding, some focus to get this thing back on track. I think they can, but I think it'll come back as a smaller company. I think it'll come back as a leaner company. I think it'll come back as a more strategic company, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. And there are going to continue to be some losses because the new CEO is taking over the same problems of the previous CEO.
100%, right. And those problems have just, it appears to be pushed off another year. He didn't want to cut the dividends because he's afraid he would, trigger an even bigger sell-off than what he saw. There is that, the group that led to Jeff Immelt's departure, they own about 2% of the company. It's kind of a rogue investment group. They want to split the whole darn thing up. I mean, they want to sell it off in pieces and think that there's actually more value in the pieces than as a whole.
And a lot of American businesses have been ruined that way when you have these, nothing but corporate raiders, come in and they see more value in the parts than the whole. And they're example of companies that were once iconic American companies that, some buccaneer came in, thought their parts were more valuable, began to sell it off, and before you knew it was all gone. Hope this doesn't happen here. Hope they work from their core out. And their core, as I mentioned now, is GE Health. It certainly wasn't GE Finance. It certainly wasn't GE Power. They recently sold a company. Another next big piece I see being sold off are the investments they have in the energy industry. I think it's Baker Hughes, where they hold about two-thirds of Baker Hughes, which is a drilling and oil patch type company. You're going to see them getting out of those industries. And if they can modernize and get out of those traditional industries and get into health, get into information, I think they have a chance. But it's going to take a tremendous cultural shift to make that move. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult.
Isn't it a bigger warning to just about every company in the world? Here's a company that was on the cover of every Forbes and Fortune, most respected company, top 10 in top rankings, you name it, they were the poster child for it. And in a very short period of time, 2, 3, 4 years, they've functionally imploded. And there wasn't an investor who didn't have a little piece of GE in some ownership structure or another. That anyone can fall, and that innovation, constant level of innovation, is critical to be able to sustain the types of economy we're in now, where it's just speed matters.
Well, no question. Look at the growth companies now: Google, Apple, Amazon. They're built on a very different model than GE was built on. IBM's another classic case. No one's buying IBM machines anymore.
Right.
They sold off their personal computers years ago to the Chinese, to Lovato. Yeah, the industry, the market, is changing, and you defined it, pretty correctly. But that's not to say a company like, GE can't add value if it stays with its knitting, it narrows down and picks the right sectors.
General Motors, as an example, sold off Saab and closed down some other divisions during the Great Recession, and now they're back and arguably better than ever before.
Yeah, with a generous support of U.S. taxpayers.
That's right. You especially, proportionately, my contribution was very small.
Well, we don't know that. You don't know that. But
Gary Sass, the money man. Actually, mine was probably bigger because you're so wealthy. You're in those tax havens all over the world that you super rich folks are so famous for.
If I wanted to be in a tax haven, I'd move back to Tennessee, where there's no personal income tax, there's no tax on dividends or capital gains. Property tax, just for example, on a $600,000 home in central Tennessee, in the Nashville area.
Do they have $600,000 homes?
Yeah, that's not a problem anymore. But the property
with plumbing?
Indoor.
Yes.
But that's the property tax. Guess what the property tax on a piece of property like that would be?
$600,000 home.
In a nice upper middle class community in Williamson
Well, here
County.
in Rhode Island, it would be around $10,000, $12,000 a year.
Depends on the community. At least 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what would it be down in Tennessee?
$2,500.
$2,500.
Yeah. So if you want to if it's just about maximizing your money.
Listen, I know URI football's ranked 17 in 1AA. I think Tennessee's ranked about worse than Florida State.
So I have a daughter that's university president at Kennesaw State in Georgia. They're ranked 4th in that poll, so I should remind that too.
Let's jump over to Washington dysfunctionality, culture clash, maybe at its height. We haven't really seen anything like it. We were broadcasting the CBS news feed of the hearings on I think it was Wednesday. Was it Wednesday or Thursday? Thursday. And, traffic was off the chart. There wasn't a news organization that wasn't running the hearings in the Senate Judiciary. What's your takeaway from what that says about the state of Congress, America, dysfunctionality, partisanship, etc.?
Oh, it's extreme hyperpartisanship. And when you get to extreme hyperpartisanship, there were no winners. I mean, this made the Bork affair, look like Sunday school picnic. There were no winners. Charges came up, later. People sat on information they had till they could release it strategically. It was, very defensive. Very poorly organized. No one looked good.
Yeah.
Democrats didn't look good. Republicans didn't look good. It remains to be seen how Judge Kavanaugh will come out of this thing. But to this point, it certainly has been difficult. And I just have it's unprecedented. There are no winners, and it shows that this is the ultimate fruit of hyperpartisanship. There's no one on that committee that, well, with some exceptions, but majority of that committee, both Democrat and Republican, didn't indicate an ability or willingness to work through this thing and compromise. It became impossible. The Democrats had Merrick Garland, Republicans had, Bork. Matter of fact, what was most astonishing about this, because this guy is a qualified jurist, you could talk about his background, and more information may or may not come out, but 1 hour and 38 minutes after his nomination was made by President Trump, the minority leader of the Senate said he could never vote to support him.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what he figured out in 1 hour and 38 minutes. He may have come to that conclusion.
Heck, Link Chafee voted for him for the D.C. court. So liberals voted for him back, whatever it was, 12, 14 years ago.
He just had an R after his name.
Yeah.
They certainly could not have read his decisions, the ones they were concerned about, in 1 hour and 38 minutes. And so that tells you something, that this was never really the kind of process of advise and consent. And I thought one statement that Justice Kavanaugh made that was pretty interesting. This wasn't about advice and consent. It was about destroy. What was it? Search and
seek and destroy.
Seek and destroy. And that doesn't serve any of us very well.
Jeff Flake, senator from Arizona, probably maybe since the first time since John McCain on Obamacare, sort of stood up, put party aside, whether you agree with him or not on either of those votes, but said, hold on a second here, there's something bigger at play, and I've got something to say about it. And fairly remarkable. He said he could only have done it because he wasn't running for re-election. I don't know, I would hope that, you know, brave souls do brave things regardless. Is that a little bit of an argument? I think the country, a lot of people in the country thought that his move, at least in the short term, brought some normalcy to the process and at least put forth at least some analysis by the FBI over the next week. Does Jeff Flake's movement in some way speak to Bob Flanders' candidacy of, boy, oh boy, not having any centrists in Congress is really a problem? You know, there's no John Chafees, there's no George Mitchells, there's no John Bros, there's none, you know, there's one Susan Collins. New England used to be full of Susan Collins.
Yeah, it absolutely does, because the only way you're going to control Trumpism,
yeah,
and the only way you're going to control people in the Congress who really are not interested in anything but their very narrow position is to create a problem solvers caucus. I'm active in a group called No Labels.
yeah.
And No Labels has come out for bipartisan solution to problems. There's been a problem solvers caucus created in the House. It consists of 48 members, 24 Democrats, 24 Republicans, whose effort is to work across party lines. And the project that we're working on right now, which wouldn't affect the Senate, I'm getting a little bit off subject, is to try to convince people not to vote for a new speaker until the rules are changed first, so you can open up the process to more deliberation and more participation. Well, the same thing holds true for the Senate. If you get senators who are interested in not giving up their principles and not giving up their ideology, but are willing to work across the aisle, then you can get a lot of things accomplished. And that's what Bob Flanders is saying. That's what Jeff Flake, you know, represented. He kind of stumbled into it because he's been in Congress for a while. He hadn't stumbled anywhere until this point. And I think, you know, he was right to slow it down. But it's interesting. The Democrats at the hearing were insisting, rightfully, I think, on, you know, a few days. Just give us a few days to get the FBI to investigate. And now you're getting all kind of pushback.
Yeah.
Well, we can't possibly do this in a week. Well, that's pretty disingenuous. They got what they wanted. You know, and somebody once, how's that saying go? You know, they got.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, yeah. But I think Flake did the right thing, and he was assisted by a Democrat, by Senator Coons of Delaware, and Susan Collins and others. So let's give it this week, and let's see if anything, you know, comes up. And I think there's a marked contrast. This is a partisan statement, but I'm going to make it. I think the way Rhode Island has been represented on that committee by our junior senator has been embarrassing. You know, the first thing you know, his testimony going through, you know, what symbols on a calendar meant and explaining things that I really don't want to discuss, you know, anywhere ever, you know, was pretty sophomoric. And then to have somebody insinuate.
Maybe one of the most, I mean, listen, I worked for 2 U.S. senators. I cannot imagine that somebody calling up, I believe it was a phone call first, making an accusation with no proof, no staff analysis, no staff research, no one going out and talking to the individual, meeting with neighbors, qualifying the person, moved it forward to the committee. Committee staffers then interviewed Judge Kavanaugh and asked him about an allegation of rape taking place in the summer of 1985 in Newport, Rhode Island, only to almost immediately thereafter, the person who made the claim recanted it, and now the FBI is investigating.
It's worse than I was going to bring the letter that our senator sent to Grassley. And basically he said he advised this person who had a complaint, you know, against Justice Kavanaugh to go talk to an investigative reporter.
To talk to an investigative reporter, pretty much simultaneous as talking to the FBI.
And that to me, you know, shows you know, a total lack of judgment. It shows this hyper partisanship, and I think Rhode Island can do better. But it was embarrassing to watch how our junior senator proceeded on this, and not that you know, both the Democrats didn't have some points. I think the right decision was made. I think Flake was very helpful in getting this thing at least reviewed by the FBI for 3, 4, or 5 days. You know, that was good. That was all that the Democrats were asking at that hearing. Eventually they got it through Flake and through a bipartisan effort. But we have a junior senator that's sending a person who's made charges, turned out to be false, to an investigative reporter, not going through the usual channels of the FBI.
And simply won't answer any question to any of the media as to what took place at his staff level. When did he become aware of it? What was his involvement? What was the decision to send it to the FBI and to an investigative reporter? And, you know, does he personally know the individual or anything like that? It was a very, very, certainly the strangest situation that I've ever known about a United States Senator's office intervening in a subject like this.
Well, it was bizarre conduct, but it's, you know, I can't say it was out of character because there's an issue of the kind of quality representation that we're getting. Rhode Island is in a very influential, powerful position, and you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican. You just have to be willing to work across the aisle,
Yeah,
try
absolutely.
to solve problems. You don't hear the same criticism of a senior senator from Rhode Island.
No.
He's influentially works across the aisle, very partisan, and so you can be both partisan and be a problem solver.
Georgetown has a center that does analysis each 2 or 4 years on the voting records of all members of Congress as to how partisan they are. And early in David Cicilline's career on the House, he was part of a joint bipartisan caucus that he helped found.
There was the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah.
But I could tell you,
but let me just tell you, he's ranked as about the most partisan member of the House of Representatives over his tenure.
I don't believe he's part of the problems. Now that he's seeking a leadership role, he's less active in our Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah. And also that caucus group had very little successes to speak of with its original founding. They did have a bowling tournament together with both members and staff, and I'm not sure how that all came out.
They probably collectively bowled 300, yeah.
You've raised a wildly interesting issue. We printed it, reprinted again last week, and then we followed up with the 3 leading gubernatorial candidates about this idea that children in the state of Rhode Island should have a Bill of Rights, pretty much guaranteeing them fairness, no bullying, but a quality education. At the end of the day, a quality education. And we asked the 3 staffs, candidate Trillo begged off on a series of questions, including that one. Governor Raimondo spoke on a number of questions asked, but refused to answer on that. And Mayor Fung complimented you, but wouldn't endorse it. Well, how do we break that logjam?
Well, you know, let me just take about 10 seconds to say what we suggested. You know, we said that...
And conservatives like you don't like the ACLU so much, but is this a job for the ACLU to file a federal lawsuit saying that kids in Rhode Island aren't getting a quality education?
Well, you know, we've lost in state courts. We've had several lawsuits filed. You know, when we filed one with Buddy back in when Judge Needham ruled in our favor, and then the Supreme Court overturned him.
Yep.
And then Sam Zuri and Steve Robinson filed a suit on behalf of Pawtucket and Woonsocket. And the court said that there was an issue, but it was for the legislature to fix. Rhode Island is one of the few states that doesn't have an enforceable right for an education. Most states have at least a broad interpretation of their constitution that's a constitutional enforceable right to have access to an adequate education. We don't, and it's something we've worked on and something the governor has snubbed us about for 4 years, so the snub wasn't surprising. But what this Bill of Rights, you know, called for was more effective teachers, appropriate materials for kids, a pathway out of failing schools.
Crazy revolutionary stuff.
You know, transparent.
Surprised you're not locked up on stuff like this.
I should be. I'm subversive. You know, transparent assessments. We had all these performance things, and half the time they weren't transparent. And you know, readable, reliable information given to parents so they have some idea what's happening. And so the reactions were very interesting. Some I understood, some I didn't. It's like you're right. Alan Fung did agree with us on principle, but he said you don't define success by how a school looks or how a parent gets information. and the success is defined by how kids, the skills they get, and whether they're good citizens.
Okay, so at Mount Pleasant High School in Providence, Rhode Island, 9% of the high school students are proficient in English, and miraculously, it seems statistically impossible, 4.5% of the students at Mount Pleasant High School are proficient at mathematics.
No,
I mean, by staying home and watching reruns of Gunsmoke, you might have a higher proficiency.
and that was the
Because you can at least count the number of gunshots that the Cowboys fired off at each other.
But see, that was what I never understood about Alan's comments, because he said you judge the school by how successful the kids are when they finish it. Well, that's true. He's right. The output's more important than the inputs.
Sure.
But unless you have effective teachers, good materials, a pathway to
So how do they get? So there's an argument statistically to make the analysis that our schools are so bad they make our kids dumber, right? In the elementary school, our proficiency rates are in the 30s and 40%, even in the urban corridor.
Well, but
in middle school, it's down to about 20%. By the time they get to high school, in the urban areas, Rogers High School in Newport has the same proficiency ratio as Central Falls High School.
no, you got to make a distinction. Rhode Island's scores, at least on the National Assessment of Education Progress, on average, pretty much at the national level. Way behind the people in the Northeast, but they do good compared against Mississippi. They're rather,
Well, anytime you have to bring up Mississippi to justify a test score, you know you're in big trouble.
Mississippi's low, but we're the average. So when you look at it, our test scores are right at the national average. But you have the savage inequality. There's numbers that you mentioned of 4, 9, 11% of kids being proficient in math or reading or on our urban schools. That's where the population is growing, and there's really a savage inequality, and that savage inequality won't be addressed unless kids, I'm going to repeat myself, unless kids have effective teachers, have access to good materials, can get out of bad schools, and it's transparent and the parents are encouraged to participate. That's what the Bill of Rights is about. And those kids are going to be trapped, generations that have been trapped, and no one's going to get out. So I didn't understand Alan's statement. He says it's a good idea, but we have to judge by the success of the school. Well, unless you have these things, you're not going to have successful schools. Governor Raimondo's statement was interesting because she pretends to be the education governor, talking about preschool and computers in schools. But if you look at the hard numbers and you say, what was our performance levels 4 years ago compared to most recent, you don't see the needle moving.
You do not.
Very much. And you don't see as many.
Incrementally. In certain districts.
Yeah, but not where the kids are really having trouble. No. And so I think if a governor was going to be the education governor, it's fine to talk about preschool and computers in schools, though I think some of the claims are a little bit exaggerated, but those are good programs. They're moving in the right direction, but you can't talk about that unless you talk about what we're going to do to make our schools more equitable, and by that I mean access. You can't mandate results, but you can give people an opportunity to have an adequate education.
I think the governor deserves credit on pre-K, full-day kindergarten statewide, pushing applications of technology into core learning, but it seems to be, that's at about 5%, and there's just no urgency. Mayor Diosa was on here the other day, and he said, well, we're not going to fix it overnight. I said, those have been the test scores since I was on the city council in 1995. I said, when's overnight?
Let me tell you, he's sure as hell not advocating for his people, because Central Falls was taken over by the state. It's so bad. The results since.
And by the way, that was about 30 years ago.
Yeah, I was doing the Sunland administration. I was involved.
Dupree, I think.
No, I was. I was
Sunland?
did the negotiation. I was in Sunland administration. It was 1991, I think. Anyhow, and for a mayor of a city, to say, well, it takes time, he is subjecting another generation of his citizens to failure, and that is an inexcusable comment for him to make. And I don't understand why some of the people, who were well motivated, certainly socially, conscious on the left, can't see that the civil rights issue of the time is education.
Absolutely.
So you talk about kids, better preschool, better all-day kindergarten. But if you get into an elementary school after those advantages, those opportunities, I should say, and in third grade, you're not taught well in the first, second, and third grade. The progress you made by going to the preschool, the all-day kindergarten, is gone.
Yeah.
And so we focus on all these other things, and everyone is recognized, governors recognizes, among others, that if a kid is not reading at level by the fourth grade, the chances of success are pretty limited. And that we have to get back to the fundamentals and that kind of focus, and that's what the Student Bill of Rights was about.
Well done, well said. Want to thank you so much. The
Pleasure.
Money Man on again. I know you have to rush out, but don't worry about Providence. They can't even get the kids to school with the bus drivers strike going on day 3, I think it is. Thank you so much for being on. We're going to be right back at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center with Saul Kaplan from the Business Innovation Factory. He'll have the solution to fixing Rhode Island schools. He'll have it done before the next BIF next September. I think he'll guarantee it on air. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Business Monday. I am Josh Fenton. This is Mr. Innovation, Saul Kaplan. We are looking out the windows at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We see a FedEx truck directly across the street. Is that the solution to getting Providence school children to schools? We could just ship them in FedEx trucks.
Maybe it's the scooters. Maybe it's jump scooters back and forth.
Well, the first day, as you may know, Kate Nangle was literally there when it happened. A girl who used to take the bus had a jump bike and got hit by a car that first morning as she was trying to go to Nathan Bishop Middle School.
I understand.
So much for innovation.
Well, listen, I understand that different stakeholder groups, employer groups need to fight for benefits and salary.
Yeah.
But when it's at the expense of our youth, the future of the state, I draw the line there. Like, we should not be holding students hostage. For these negotiations. It's just bad business, really is.
We were talking earlier that the proficiency rate at Mount Pleasant High School for English at the high school level is 9%, and for mathematics it's 4.5%. Might their proficiencies increase if they didn't go to school? Because certainly there's not a lot of learning going on at that school.
Well, why don't we debate the test?
Yeah, right. It's always the test.
Why don't we debate how we measure it instead of actually being honest and saying whatever tool you use to measure it, it's really no good.
Yeah.
And we need to transform it.
Over the weekend, Thursday, the SEC announced that they were investigating Tesla and Elon Musk for his August tweet saying that he was going to take the company private at $420 per share. That looked to be a little out of bounds, according to the Securities and
A little?
Exchange Commission. And they announced an inquiry on investigation, formal investigation on Thursday. By Sunday, they had reached a settlement for $20 million penalty to Mr. Musk, $20 million penalty to Tesla, and he had to relinquish his position as chairman of the board, could remain as CEO. An expensive tweet, but not really that punitive as the stock went up 15% or 10% today.
This is a fairly straightforward, what I call a wrist slap.
Yes,
right.
right.
You know, not that $20 million isn't real
Well, isn't
money,
chairman of the board far more important? I mean,
no, even that. I mean, listen. I first saw that the way this came down is the SEC, negotiated with Elon and his team, had a deal on the table. It looked like a fairly typical deal. You relinquish your chairman role for a few years, but you could return. You can stay in the company as the CEO, right? So, which would have been the bigger deal. And the money, they asked for a couple of new board members on the thing. It was pretty typical, right? And he walked away. Like when I first read it, he said no to the deal. And I'm like, what is going on with this guy? Like someone needs to get in this guy's ear. I mean, if he goes to court with this thing, he could lose the whole company.
Absolutely.
Right? And you saw the stock price start to tank. So somebody got in his ear, and got him to think better of it. And he went back to the table, and he took the deal. He lives to disrupt another day. It's an expensive lesson, but he was clearly in the wrong. I mean, it's one thing to tweet what you're thinking about, but when you're the CEO and chairman of a publicly traded company, and you start tweeting out material information that can affect the stock price, right? That's clearly against the law. And I think he should feel pretty fortunate, to still, have his job and get it behind him, and get on with the business of producing these cars, and disrupting transportation is what he really needs to be doing.
Over the weekend, I think it became official, California implemented a policy that requires publicly traded companies headquartered in California to have at least one woman on their overseeing board, whether it's board of directors or whatever. Your thoughts on that? Is that the place of government to demand privately held companies to, even if they're publicly traded, they are private ventures, that they have to have a woman on? Or is that, listen guys, boys, let's get with it, it's 2018, there's plenty of brilliant women that could help your companies?
Well, I mean, listen, this should happen because it's the right thing to do, and because you don't have to look around to know, that we need a diverse set of participants on the board, including gender diversity. California loves to be at the cutting edge. It's certainly large enough and has some leverage. It affects
seventh largest economy in the world.
No,
I think
it's
what
pretty
it is.
amazing.
Seventh,
and you see this on multiple domains where California pushes, and the federal government can't just wave their hands through, what California does because it's such a large part of our economy. So I actually welcome, the fact that they're pushing the envelope. I wish it wasn't necessary. We should comprise boards, with the diversity that reflects our communities, and we should do it aggressively.
But you haven't seen a great progress. I mean, 2 Fortune 500s female CEOs will get picked up this year, 2 will get dropped off next year. I mean, there's been no major progress.
No, it's gone the wrong way. I mean, it's actually,
in many positions.
It's actually gotten worse. No, it's not an easy problem to solve because you don't just become the CEO.
You can't legislate it, right?
And you don't just become the CEO, right? You got to build a set of experiences and roles. It takes time, but it doesn't mean that we can't accelerate it. That we can't put promising women or any kind of diversity that we want on our board, that we can't accelerate that, and that we can't find representatives to do it, and there should be no excuses on this. So if California is going to do more than a subtle nudge, towards that, I think it's a good idea, even if I don't believe ultimately, that this should be regulated, but it looks like unless we provide some pretty clear mandates that a lot of this doesn't happen.
Me Too has had a profound effect on the workplace. Numerous men, alleged to have had extremely bad behavior, have lost very significant positions. Not many have gone to jail. I think only Bill Cosby is the only one facing jail time for sexual assault, somewhat tied to the workplace. Obviously, last week with the Senate hearings relative to the Supreme Court nominee, we entered even another phase, or maybe it was the second phase of Anita Hill, but whatever it might be, all this is going to have a profound effect on business. How's it going to work? How's it going to play out? What's the impact going to be in your Biff crystal ball?
Oh, well, the way I look at it, it is inevitable and it's right, and we should welcome and accelerate this. Look at us, we're actually having a national conversation.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's true.
Right.
And it's an uncomfortable conversation,
Yep.
for sure. But it needs to be had. And we can't wave our hands through it or walk away from it. We need to get people with different views, at the same table. I loved, what Jeff Flake did. And even if it's just a symbol
Right.
of, we're going to have a different conversation here, that maybe we can do what's right and we can get out of this partisan, polarized, kind of debate back and forth. Now, what will happen at the end of this week, I don't know. I can tell you, I hope that we get to a resolution, that doesn't send us back, 20 years.
Right.
And if we do, and there's a pretty high probability that the investigation will be constrained, and we won't get the kind of information we need, and that we'll put Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court.
Yep.
I think the odds today are pretty high that that's going to happen. It shouldn't happen, but it could. I'd be disappointed in it, but boy, there's going to be backlash to that. Never mind just in the midterm elections coming up, but for a very, very long time, and there should be. People have a right to be angry about this. People have a right to expect a society where we're not dealing with those issues. So I don't know if it's a crystal ball or not, and how much of it is wishful thinking. It always takes longer than I want. That's just always true. But there's reasons to be both discouraged in the near term, but encouraged about the direction that we're headed in.
So let's talk about monumental changes. Gary and I talked about a little bit. GE. If you want the poster child for disruption,
Yeah.
self-inflicted disruption, by the way, is GE.
Oh my goodness.
Once I said it last segment. Used to be on the cover of every other month's Forbes or Fortune. Most admired company, blah, 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 you name it. Their CEO was this, that, or the other thing. And now it looks like the wheels have completely come off. Third CEO in 12 months.
Less than a year, right? So
Yep.
John Flannery, who's now out, thrown out by the board, less than 12 months.
Yeah.
CEO of a major company.
Like Gordon Gee at Brown University, right?
That's unbelievable. But look at the results.
Jerry
and
Ford, Gordon Gee, John Flannery, right?
It's pretty amazing that it happened that quickly. We've talked about GE before. This is the behemoth that should have been working on the transformation to the new digital world. I thought the ideas were right, but you don't turn that kind of ocean liner overnight.
Well, they rolled it overnight.
It's pretty unbelievable. Hey, you should listen to, sorry for the shameless pitch here, but I just did a podcast interview with Beth Comstock, who was the vice chair at GE. 27 years. She was the voice of innovation at GE. She orchestrated a lot of the progress that
We'll
they
plug
made.
that in this article.
Yeah.
I mean,
You should
really,
listen to it.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
now she's a free agent, and after 27 years at GE, and we had a very, very interesting conversation about what it takes to move innovation in the context of a very large enterprise like GE. And there are examples of where they were making progress, but at that scale and with the expectations of Wall Street, what they didn't move fast enough. They got really, really hurt. They jettisoned a lot of businesses, probably waited too long, to do it. The stock price has taken a major hit, and now the CEO, finds himself out of a job. So they've got a lot of work to do to get that repositioned, to take the remaining assets and to make it exciting again. And so we'll see what the new CEO can do, but it's a sad story. It affects a lot of people, including here in Rhode Island, where we have
Right.
hopes of small in the grand scheme of things, but not for Rhode Island.
No, originally it was supposed to have 100 jobs by this February, according to the agreement with Commerce Corporation. I think at last count they're at 50. I would think that that is somewhat in question now. But the promise was over the next couple years it would be 300 to 400 jobs here. But also to the region, GE's headquarters was going to Boston with big promises of thousands of jobs and a major headquarters being built in the city, and all those things are in question.
They're going to take
as well.
a much bigger hit. They have a lot more at stake.
They
in
wrote off
that,
$23 billion. That probably hurts your chances of the good carpet in the new headquarters.
We could be fine here, although the folks that they were going to put here, the platform they were going to put here was part of their digital strategy that they backed off from. But we don't have as much at stake, as they do in Boston and in other places. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Bikes, scooters. Scooters came, they left, they don't seem to be coming back. Bikes are here, seem to be more welcomed, seem to be much more well used, seem to be vaguely safer. Is it the known because most people know how to ride a bike? They don't seem to be on sidewalks quite as much. They seem to actually, in many cases, not all, seem to be following some expectation of traffic rules and et cetera. Is that the appropriate amount of innovation, or are you still going back to your death ride, Evel Knievel bird scooters?
Boy, is that in the eyes of the beholder the appropriate amount of innovation?
Yes, that's
Everybody
my
loves
question.
innovation until it affects them.
Until you until someone dies right on the curb in front
Well,
of
this
your
is a
business.
different. So Jump is a different business model than the birds. First of all, these are electric bikes, not scooters. Although Jump does have the beginnings of a scooter play, but they're only in one city right now. Whereas it looks to me like there's probably 15 cities, including Providence now, where they put the electric bikes. They're tethered to a docking station, so they're not just willy-nilly left on street corners. You have to put them in to the actual dock.
A guy riding on his Jump ran out of energy in front of our house
and left it there,
and was not pleased with the fact that he no longer had. And I guess when you lose the energy, it's not an easy thing to pedal. This is like going uphill.
Oh, it doesn't just become a bicycle?
It did not appear to. I don't know enough, but it did not look like.
So are the pedals just to make it look like you're pedaling the bicycle?
Could be.
The other thing that they've done, and you might know the details of this, I don't, that they came in here and they must have created an arrangement with the city.
Yeah.
Right. And so now the city has a vested interest. I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
That they get a piece of every. They get a piece of every transaction. I'm imagining.
Yeah.
So from the city standpoint, this is new revenue.
Yeah.
Whereas the bird folks just came in and put the bikes out here before
it's called
they
the
had
Raymond Patriarca Senior Provision. You get a piece of all the action, right?
Yeah. So now the city is more aligned to the interest of it. So that makes it more viable in itself. And then I don't know, how well this is known, but this thing is owned by Uber. Right. Like Jump Scooters is owned by Uber.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting play for Uber. That's all about the sharing economy. This isn't sharing. This is just they own the bicycles.
Yeah. Right.
So they have the capital to invest in to be able to create those shiny red, bicycles that are sitting in those stations. So we'll see. I think Uber's pretty serious about creating yet another option to get from A to B in a way that's user-friendly. So I like the concept. It's aligned to the city, and they have a vested interest in it. So let's see. Let's see how it does, and whether the scale of Providence,
is
offers is big enough for the economics of this thing to work. for all the parties concerned.
EcoRI had a story saying that it might be a little red line too. The jump bikes don't seem to be all over the city. They just seem to be in the more affluent areas. East Side,
Well, I see them
downtown
on the east side,
Providence.
yeah.
They don't quite get over to the south side or the west end or to Onlyville.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not quite as equitable as some
Yeah.
have thought.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they did the math on, where are the parts of the city where it's more likely that someone's going to take out their charge card and, and pay for this thing. But also the city itself, must have had a role in giving them access to where they put those stations.
Yeah, those stations,
right?
yeah.
So they had a seat at that table. So it'd be interesting. I've not seen these details. Maybe I
Yeah.
missed them, but I just haven't seen them. Like, I would love to understand what is the business relationship with the city.
Right.
Right. What's the role that the city has in deciding where these stations are?
Yeah.
What are the viable regulations that kind of govern and manage this? So that'll answer your question of how much innovation is enough, how all the stakeholders come together, in a way where the conditions are right, for this new model, to take over. And the other way to look at it is who's ox's gourd.
Right.
Who doesn't want that? When somebody plucks their charge card down to use a jump cycle, what did that replace? Who's being disrupted, by that? So pretty interesting example. I'm glad it's here.
Bird Scooter, who is here and has left and may or may not be coming back, has got a reported valuation of $1 billion.
Really?
Yeah, I believe reported last week.
Yep.
Seems to be a good little piece of business if you can handle a Bird Scooter.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, the way they handled Providence, again, smaller scale.
Right.
Wasn't that impressive, because if you don't get the city, to play, and
It's been their strategy in all cities. They
Yeah.
they kind of come in the dark of night, they roll them out and see what happens and see what the community
Yeah.
reacts. They did not go to Boston, as I think was well reported, because Marty Walsh said, you come in and we're going to throw them in the tow yard.
I think they were throwing them in the harbor like it's tea.
No, that was Worcester.
Like it's
That
tea
was
or
in
something.
Worcester,
Like, they're
I
gonna
think.
dump it into the
No,
harbor.
actually, Worcester had a bike company
Yeah.
go there, and they actually left. It was Jump's competitor,
Yeah.
and those just got destroyed.
Yeah. Well, now that there's a relationship with the city, and I don't know how much money the city will make from this, but whatever it is, believe me, the next player that comes in, is either going to offer a better deal than Jump, at the end of their contract, or they're not going to play.
All of this has been a major topic of almost everything we've talked about is transportation and how different transportation is beginning to look.
Yeah.
We are still car bound. We've seen a couple RIPTA buses go by, but we're in this rock and roll era of transformation of transportation in cities around the country, Providence being one of them. Is that pace going to continue to explode?
Yeah.
We took the ferry down to Newport on Saturday. We took it back. It was great. You kind of wonder, why can't it be
Right.
permanent year-round? Right. I guess, a few days a year it's not going to work because of weather, but it seems like a lot of days of the year it could work, or another type
Absolutely.
of vessel.
Yeah.
It was tried about 7 or 8 years ago, I want to say, and failed. There was a federal grant to run it out of off of Allen's Avenue, but it now seems like a few years later it might work. What's your thoughts on it? Is Biff working on any of these designs and trying to rethink how transportation, how people move for the efficiency of
most
communities?
of what we focus on at Biff is how do we reimagine education, how do we reimagine healthcare, and how do we reimagine public services.
Yeah.
So we haven't done anything specific to the transportation industry, but it's the same. It's a systems challenge or opportunity.
Right.
It requires a system solution, and these new models change the psychology. So this Saturday night, we took an Uber from our home up on the east side, downtown for dinner. We knew that one, it was water fire night, not a good idea
To bring a
be
car.
bringing our car down. And two, we're probably going to have a glass of wine, at dinner. And why wouldn't we just take an Uber?
Right.
It's not that expensive. It's easy to use. And then we talked about it. My wife and I, and we said, like, would we have ever, before Uber, would we have ever called a taxi?
Never.
never once. Like
Nope.
it wouldn't even occur to us to have called a taxi to get from the east side, to dinner and then back again. And yet this easy to use app that's transparent, we can see when the car's coming.
Right.
I don't even have to take my charge card out at the end. I just pop out of the car and say thank you.
Yeah.
It made it so easy, and nothing that Uber created did they invent.
Right.
Like the app, like
Nope.
everybody can create an app. Like the kids at Brown can write an app.
Right.
The kids at RISD can write an app. They invented nothing. They created a new business model that transformed the experience, in our case, to get to a restaurant and back. That's what a new business model does. That's what innovation does. It's not about the new invention or technology. It's about a different way to solve a problem. And that's what those jump scooters do too. There are people that want it to be easier to get from A to B. In the existing modes of transportation, that ripped a bus that just came by, or parking here downtown, are just not great options. Why shouldn't we allow new options that are safe and you can't argue aren't in the best interest of consumers? Why wouldn't we allow more of that to happen? Now, why don't we take that same kind of thinking and approach and get at some of the real serious challenges
Right.
we have, like our education system, like our healthcare system.
Why would you want to mess around with success like 9% proficiency in English and 4.5% proficiency in mathematics at Mount Pleasant High School?
I don't know. How long do we have? How long do we talk? Now, let me count the reasons why. Like, how about our entire future is about enabling our youth and creating a future workforce that can drive an economy that's based on knowledge, and doing it in a way where everybody in Rhode Island can play and participate, right? I don't know. Why would we want to do that?
Right. I don't know. As always, a master of innovation, a great across all the different issues hitting Rhode Island. One last question. Are you surprised how uninnovative this governor's race is?
Uninnovative?
Yeah, no big ideas. Nobody's talking about a big idea. We're talking about guns in schools. I mean, nothing, no shockingly big thoughts about how to improve and transform Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Keep it on, the governors keep it on the track, and Mayor Fung's take it back to the way it used to be, it seems like.
I think some of this is, and this is true in politics a lot, like is playing not to lose,
Yeah.
right? So if it looks fairly stable and predictable, after we get through the primaries and it looks like someone's in the lead, well, you don't want to screw up the lead, right? No, you wonder if you're behind, there you're more likely to try something novel and different and to be bolder, but I don't see that either.
No,
right?
we don't
so
see it.
I always say a pox on all of their houses, right?
Yeah.
Because in the end it's about our future and we need to be far bolder about it, but the game of politics is about winning an election, right? And so I'm not an expert on what it takes to win an election. All I can do is advocate for bolder, clearer leadership that puts us on a path to transforming our community and our economy and really allowing the organic talent that we have here,
Right.
For the conditions for them to take more responsibility, to be more accountable for creating a stronger future. Let's stop pointing at the politicians and the institutions, and let's start looking in at ourselves to say, wait a minute, we have the conditions, we can self-organize to drive the kind of change that we want,
Right.
and why don't we point more of that towards creating a better future here in our own community? So.
Right. Saul Kaplan, Mr. Innovation, Business Innovation Factory, thanks so much for joining us on Business Monday. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been a busy afternoon on Business Monday. I want to thank everybody. Thanks our friends at Deepwater Wind, Commerce RI, Saul Kaplan, and our guests earlier today. Tomorrow afternoon, Kate Nagel's probably going live with Pulitzer Prize winning author Bob Woodward over at the Convention Center right about now. And then tomorrow afternoon, we may have a super interesting guest, one of the leading writers in the country who's got a major new movie coming out and check back with us on 3:30 tomorrow. And then in the 4 o'clock hour, Laura Afonso will have her show on everything cool going on in eating and drinking. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. See you tomorrow on Go Local Live.